Hey guys, what's up? A little bittersweet update from sheep yard this morning. This mama over here that I've been waiting on my final ewe to lamb did. It appears probably the wee hours this morning. When I'd gone to bed last night, she had not given birth yet. And the babies are dry, so at some point between last night and this morning, she had triplets, and 2 are alive and 1 is not. And I don't know. I mean, he appears to be fully formed. I don't think that, I've wondered if maybe she had lost a baby and that's what was keeping her from going to labor. She was so swollen, and if something wasn't engaging, I wasn't sure what was going on. Definitely got a full-size stillborn baby, which is sad. Obviously not the saddest outcome that it could be, and she's okay, and there are 2 babies that are healthy, but it's still sad. So not a fun thing to wake up and find. Hey mama. These 2 little ones look lovely. The one on the left's face looks a little swollen, which makes me think that maybe she did have a little bit of a hard time. So I'm gonna keep an eye on her and make sure that she's, you know, recovering okay. She had a little bit of a stressful labor. Oh wow, that's a big lamb. She had 3. Yep, it looks like both of these are ewes. Look how much bigger the one on the right is. Not having watched this labor, all I can do is speculate. But I would not be surprised if that really big lamb getting stuck isn't what caused the other one to not make it. Farm life is not for the faint of heart sometimes. Still worth it. Let's go milk the goats. Hey, I'll walk up to the barn if you want to take this back up to the sheep. I left the one that didn't make it on the ground. The sack is covering his face, and she's got 2 ewe lambs that are alive. One is really big, and her face is kind of swollen looking, and I'm wondering if maybe she didn't get stuck or something like that, and then he didn't, that or the mama just didn't clean him off. You know, like, he looks perfect. Like, it doesn't look like he's, like, deteriorated or anything. I guess it just is what it is. It just makes me sad.
Yeah, it's sad.
Well, she has 2 ewe lambs that are healthy. He's up there if you can. I just wanted you to take a look at it and see what you thought. Farm life.
All right.
2 thumbs way down. Yeah. There's movement on the shop foundation this morning. That's exciting. We started that project and then we went on our vacation, so we held off because we wanted to obviously be here during the progress happening. And then the hurricane came, and so we haven't moved. I mean, obviously you can't pour a foundation whenever the footing is full of water, so they're finishing. They have to kind of tidy some things back up this morning, and tomorrow is inspection day, and then the concrete pour is Friday, so that's pretty exciting. We'll get some movement on that project. I know Jeremiah's just giddy excited. Girls, good morning. Helen. So I am milking goats one-handed this morning. I had to go to the doctor yesterday because I have inflammatory tendonitis in my left wrist, and it's part of having autoimmune issues. I have the nutshell, and this is not asking for medical advice. I know if I talk about medical things, sometimes I'll state things and people start trying to speculate and guess. Like, I actually have a very good grasp of what's going on in my body, and I have done a lot of healing in the last few years, and honestly feel better than I have ever in my adult life. But I have like lifelong health issues that I've dealt with since I was a child, and part of what I deal with now is the repercussions of lots of antibiotics. And anyway, I have like essentially like a dysregulated inflammatory response. So I'm actually not allergic to anything on an allergy test, but I have allergic reactions kind of regularly, and things like this popped up, and likely because, you know, I had a virus a week and a half ago, and then I had a issue with one of my teeth, and it was a number of things. And so when that happens, sometimes my body's just like, oh, we doing this? We going, you know, we going all out on freaking out? Okay, cool. And then something else will come up that is seemingly unrelated. So I went and got it looked at, and it's tendonitis. It's very swollen. My wrist's just hurting really bad. And so I'm in a sling because leaving things alone and resting is honestly not my strong suit. And with tendonitis, that makes it a lot worse. So this is keeping it from moving. It's mildly inconvenient, you know, it's fine. I'm fine. Been kind of in the position to have to talk about death quite a bit lately. And I mean, I've been talking about death for as long as I've been talking about homesteading, because you're not gonna do homesteading without having to deal with death in some regard. And I think framing it in a healthy light is important, but it's still like dealing with stuff like that, like finding a baby that didn't make it, and, you know, wondering like, had I been here, could I have assisted, and like different things like that. It always, even if there was nothing that could be done, even if it just completely was just a completely unavoidable situation, not a stewardship issue at all, it still kind of like sits on my chest like a stone, you know. I mean, it's still heavy. Milking one-handed is very tedious. I'm not about it. But I want my arm to heal. So, I'm gonna do what I can. Will actually milked for me yesterday, and I may have him do it later on this week. He doesn't work every day, so I don't want my other wrist to get tendonitis because I'm overworking it. You deal with it. I mean, Maya's working on the shop, or else he would probably come up here and do it for me. Goats gotta get milked. I mean, this is the reality of having dairy animals. Sometimes you gotta push through. I milked him with 102-degree fever a week and a half ago. Because sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. So I have been thinking, and sometimes I'll start pondering topics and I'll really think about them for a while before I even try to speak about them. And this particular topic I've talked to a few of my close friends about, Maya. I don't really have an exact point to make yet, but I'm gonna verbally process a little bit and kind of share with you guys what's been on my mind while we wait for Claire here to finish her breakfast. It's been about 7 years that I have been making content in the homesteading and gardening sphere. And it's been a pretty wild 7 years, I'll be honest. Like, there's been a lot of ups and downs. And just on a personal level, I mean, our lives have changed drastically over the last 7 years. There's been a lot of massive change and adjustment and growth, and hard but good things. And then obviously, like, in our culture and kind of on a world scale, the culture itself has just changed drastically, I feel like. When I first started making homesteading gardening content, it was kind of coming into the mainstream that, like, people thought of this as way of living. And at the time, you know, like in the mid 2000 teens, you know, I had just desperately wanted to homestead for so long. And it was still relatively niche at that point, I would say. Like, especially early on, like in the 2010 area, like there were so many people that would say, what do you do, or what do you like to do? And I'd be like, oh, I want to homestead. I mean, that was my dream life. I talked about it. I just absorbed every bit of information I could. It was my dream. It felt so out of reach. But many people that I talked about it to were like, you want to do what? Like, you want to be a pioneer? Like, you want to do Little House on the Prairie life? Like, they did not understand. By like the mid 2000 teens, when we actually started doing it, at that point it was starting to become a little more known. And so when I started making content like in this realm, I would say, you know, it was well received. I mean, there was definitely an audience for it. There weren't just a ton of people making content. I was kind of one of the earlier ones. And then COVID happened. And when 2020 came along and COVID happened, I have my own theory. I really think a lot of what happened is people saw empty grocery store shelves, like for the first time in their lives, especially we Americans. I mean, we have just honestly just lived in abundance. As a millennial American, I turned 40 next year. And that was the first time, other than, you know, like when it was snow, that, you know, you would have times that there would be a very obvious reason why things would sell out. But it was never like most of the grocery store is gone. And I remember going to the Kroger when kind of everything hit hard with COVID, like when they started shutting schools down, and it was obviously going to be a situation like nothing we'd ever experienced. I remember going to the grocery store, and I took pictures of that because I didn't want to forget it. It was so bewildering, in the atmosphere of fear in that grocery store. I will never forget that experience. And that sent just this massive wave of people. I feel like that, as well as, you know, just some different governmental things that have happened in different places, it just created this exodus almost of people like fleeing to a simpler life and looking for sustainability, looking for security. And there's been like this interesting decline, I would say, within the last year and a half. And this is purely coming from my vantage point, where I hear from a lot of people all over the world, all different walks of life, because I am not particularly like a political person. I'm really outspoken in my Christian faith, but I think I'm pretty like loving and welcoming to people. So even that, like, my following is very diverse. And so when I say I'm hearing from people from all over, like I am like hearing from people from all over. I would say that from my vantage point in the last year and a half, there's been something of a decline in homesteading, simply because a lot of people are kind of having to lose that dream since they can't afford it. I mean, like, the cost of living and inflation situation is bringing such a crunch on people that I feel like it has changed the homesteading movement to a certain degree, maybe slowed it down a little bit, simply because people, I mean, how do you dream for stuff like that when you're hardly making ends meet? How do you dream of getting land when interest rates are at 8%? I just feel like a lot of people are coming to a place that the difficulty of the situation is kind of making them back off of that dream a little bit. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what your thought on that is. That is kind of my assessment. She's done. We're going to switch goats. Now, that kind of leads me to the place where I am now. And I don't have it fully sorted out. You know, we've been having to do kind of a lot of assessing of just everything in our life. So we call it a life audit. Sometimes I imagine like holding a hand of cards, and when I feel myself overextended and I feel like I'm really having to juggle to make my life work, and I'm constantly facing like things falling through the cracks, I just look at the cards I'm holding, and each one is representative of someone or something in my life. Like I've got all my kids. We have 6 children. Malia just moved here from having never lived full-time close to us. There's the Malia card. Jackson, we're moving him to his dorm. in a few days, you know, like there's the Jackson card. Asher is going in senior year. Toby has started middle school, just started playing football. Ezra is in the 5th grade, and you know, really starting to deal with a lot of changes in himself. Ben is his 4th grade and the baby, and very active in baseball. And they're just all the different things with each of my children. They each represent a card. There's my marriage. There are things like the goats. There's YouTube. There's the personal goals I have, and the books that I want to write, and the things that I want to do. And each of these are a card that requires my time. And as we have really been kind of assessing some different dreams and goals we have over the last few months, we've shared a lot about it. We've just been assessing what cards are we holding, because sometimes you'll still be holding something that really needs to be put down. And ultimately what happens is you have a capacity, like you can only do so much. And if you're not intentional on what you drop, sometimes you'll unintentionally drop something that you really need to hold on to. And so we've just been assessing a lot of things, and I've been thinking a lot about homesteading and really looking at why do we do what we do? What is the motivation? What are the things that maybe should be let go of? What are the things that shouldn't? You know, just auditing what it is that we're holding. And one of the things that I don't talk just a ton about on my channel has really come to the forefront in our decision making again. Now I did a podcast. I recorded it, it's been probably close to 2 months ago. It just went live a few weeks ago. And I've been kind of taking a break from the podcast just out of necessity of time. But the podcast was called For Such a Time as This, and I kind of shared, and this was kind of on the early end of me beginning to audit these things and assess these things. But one thing I really don't talk a ton about here is what I believe is a real need to be prepared. The reason I don't talk a ton about that is I hear a lot of people talking about it in a really fearful way. Like, I can feel the fear that drives it. And within the prepper community, I mean, like, I've been a fly on the wall in the prepper community for a long time, but I frankly can't engage with a lot of what's there because I feel the fear that is pushing in that community. Not everybody, but it's there. I mean, we can have a discussion about it not being everybody, but I will not concede that there's not fear in the prepper community. There's so much fear in the prepper community, and it makes me feel sick. And somewhere in the desire to maintain peace, which I believe that you should be able to be getting prepared peacefully, but in a desire to not be lumped in with fear, a lot of times I just don't talk about things, and I don't know that that's necessarily the right approach. I mean, I don't claim to have this all figured out by any means. The truth is, I mean, we turn the camera on and share our real life. Not necessarily from a place of being experts. We've never claimed to be experts. We share our learning process. We share the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think one of the greatest strengths I have is that I feel things, and I think that in a world where a lot of people are trying to be numb, I think that there's power in saying, hey, I'm dealing with this thing, and it's a little sad, and it feels like a stone on my chest, but this is real life. Because what that does for all of the people who are living real life sadnesses, but they're feeling the pressure to just shove it and move on and minimize and move on. When they see somebody who refuses to do that, they get the permission to just sit with it for a little while and then not have to carry it for the rest of their life. I know, as I said, I was going to verbally process this and that I didn't really fully know the point. The thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is that I am largely driven in all of this homestead stuff to be prepared. I think that the human tendency to want to identify threats and to need to feel something in a culture that largely doesn't really make space for that. I think that we're prone to latch on to fear, or we're prone to tell people who make us feel a little afraid to hush. And I kind of am figuring out, where am I coming from? What do I actually feel? What do I actually think? Because as Jeremiah and I have been auditing all our systems, like, okay, what do we need to have as far as our dairy cows? What are we hoping for as far as our lambs? Like, what are we doing? Like, how many of these lambs are we going to keep? What are we going to do with our goats? Like, we're making all these decisions for our farm. And really, the bottom line of what we're hoping to do is to be prepared in all situations and maintain systems where we are able to thrive no matter what. Now, I've always been deeply fascinated with the era of the world wars, from World War I to World War II, really with an emphasis on World War II. This was a fascination that started for me whenever I was in high school. I had a teacher that was very passionate about teaching, you know, the Holocaust beyond just kind of the basic curriculum being required. Like, she had gone and done all these tours and all these different things, and like, she was very passionate about teaching that, and that kind of spurred me into a lot of wanting to research just everything that happened worldwide during World War II. And since then, of course, with my bend towards the importance of food, I've since really taken up a big interest in understanding kind of how food was a huge factor in fighting that war. On top of that, you know, my granddaddy, we called him Pappy. He passed away when Ezra was an infant. He was 90, and he was a boy during the Great Depression. And so my childhood, I remember all these stories that he would tell. He loved to tell stories, and even till the day he died, his mind was sharp as a tack. I mean, he could recall details of events that had happened 50 years before, just as if they had been yesterday. He was always really sharp. And with that being the case, like, his stories were so fascinating, and they were very poor. I remember this one image that he had, and it was a family photo. It was like the only family photo they ever had. And I remember in the picture, he and his several siblings, nobody had shoes on. His mother was the only one who was wearing shoes. And I remember asking him, I'm like, Pappy, why didn't y'all wear shoes for your family picture? And he said, well, honey, it was the Depression. He said, nobody had shoes. And I was like, oh. And he goes, but we didn't have them before the Depression, so we didn't even mind. And I was like, okay, wow. But he would tell me stories. You know, his family was really poor, and they lived on the edge of town. And my nanny, my grandmother, they were town folk. Like, her father was a white collar job, and she had such a different recollection of the Depression than my pappy did, because my pappy had been poor before, and they actually really thrived when everybody else was struggling, because they grew food, and they raised rabbits. And he would tell me that his job was to butcher those rabbits when the town folks would come and buy them from them to have food. And they had a dairy cow. They had, you know, their life stayed the same during the Depression. In fact, they had a little bit of an upper hand during the Depression that they didn't have previously, because they knew how to be poor. They were fine, and they were thriving, and they also had something of value. And I think that probably went like deep into my subconscious and my decision making as a very young child, and I think that that's evident in the decision making that I have now. Everything that we have done here has been for the purpose of preparation, but I don't mean that in a sense of we're just waiting for the shoe to fall. I actually don't feel that way. I actually do not feel fear. Now, there are times that I feel a lot of urgency, and there are times that I feel a lot of concern. I think that the system that we live in is incredibly corrupt, and I think I've felt somewhat discouraged at times in speaking up to that, because I see a lot of the fear, I see a lot of the denial, and I don't know, like, where do I fit in that? You know, we have this innate need to belong. We may be enlightened animals, but there is a very animal fact of our existence, our nature, our flesh. Like, we are animals. And therefore, there are things that we are going to do or be driven to do that are just instinct. And acknowledging that is incredibly empowering. And we need to belong. I talk about community so much because it is integral for humans to thrive as nourishing food. Having the capacity to have community and healthy relationship, it's just imperative. The enemy of belonging is not rejection. Now, rejection feels awful. It feels so awful. It feels like death, because that innate thing of needing to belong, this is why we so want to avoid rejection. Because when we experience rejection, it strikes a very instinctual place in us that says, oh God, I have to belong in order to survive and in order to thrive. But the enemy of belonging is actually not rejection. The enemy of belonging, I believe, is trying to fit in. It's trying to mold yourself into a place that you'll never actually feel secure, because it's not who you truly are. And so the true you is not belonging when you are molding to fit in. And therefore you will always feel somewhat insecure that the rug's going to come out from underneath you. And I think that I have a tendency sometimes when I'm like, I see a lot of opinions and I don't really feel like I belong in any of those camps. It kind of occurred to me recently, well, Jess, maybe there are other people out there that if you spoke with your voice about what you are deeply convinced to be true, that they would find belonging with you. And where I stand right now, I very much, we are minded to be prepared, but not in a sense that I want to live for some catastrophic thing that could happen. I have a tendency to catastrophize things. I mean, it's just the way that my brain is wired. And I do feel a ton of defiance. I feel like we are living in a culture that largely is not for the health of people and for the health of relationships and for the health of our bodies, and that has largely been set up to rob us of being able to create legacy. But I don't feel afraid. I do feel defiant. I don't feel like I want to prep for catastrophe. I do feel like I want to be living my life in such a way that I can thrive no matter what happens. And so I think that if I had to succinctly say this is what I feel a very hopeful defiance. I feel a very proactive preparation. I feel a real drive to thrive no matter what happens. And if I had to say, what are you doing here on this farm? I mean, I'm setting my family up that we are living in a way that is not easily shaken. That's my hope. And if I had to succinctly say what I want to do with this camera, it would be to show you that that's possible. It would be to say, we don't have to make every season's decisions based on trying to get by. I don't want to live in that mindset. I don't care what's happening in the world. Now, going into this year, being an election year, I fully expected it to be a little chaotic, just on social media, in the media, just in the world in general. The very system is set up that it would divide people and pit them against each other. And I think that it is good to be able to seek representation in our government. I think that it is foolish to choose division from the flesh and bone people who are right in front of your face that you are doing day-to-day life with, because when you start allowing that to get fractured over opinions and your representation and all of that stuff, you lose a lot of the power that can be had in community and relationship. And sometimes community and relationship just requires for everything to not be all about you, whoever you are and whatever it is that you believe. When I have kind of started talking about things, it's what is up with the fact that there are so many people like just weeding through everything you say to find something they can make an assumption about to attack you, disqualify, or cancel you. Guys, we got to stop. We have got to stop with that temptation it is a self-righteousness that honestly will never create resilience. If we cannot have relationship and connection, we're not prepared to thrive in any situation. And I don't know. Again, as I said, I don't have it all figured out, but I really just want to live on purpose. I really just want to feel what I actually feel. I really just want to stand for what I actually stand for. And I know I'm not alone in that. And I really think that our power is in choosing connection and being steadfast and seeking resilience and being prepared and focusing on our homes, our families, our legacies. And that creates kind of an unshakable foundation. And that's what I really want to encourage. It's what I want to have. And if it's something that I value enough to seek for myself, of course I want to enable other people to seek it as well. So, kind of some thoughts. Maybe not exactly tidy, but it's what I've been thinking about. There's old Fernie girl laying down in her stall over there. Her predicament is definitely part of my overwhelm this morning because she had a retained placenta which caused some sort of infection. We had to have her treated for that, and in the process of how much she's laid down, of course she's getting up and moving, and we're getting up and moving her, but now she's got mastitis. So we're just steadily plugging away at taking care of her. I mean, we've had the vet out. We're doing everything that there is to do. I feel confident in our care here and our ability to do what needs to be done, but it's disconcerting, and it's also just sad whenever one of your animals is having a hard time. So I'd love your feedback. I'd love to have a conversation on this. I'll be in the comment section reading what it is you have to say. What are you driven by? What are you doing? Living your life on purpose. What is your goal? What's your motivation? What's your dream here? Let's not get so bogged down by circumstances that we stop dreaming and envisioning the better that we want to move towards. I think that's important. Anyway, thank you guys for hanging out with me today on this big up and down vlog. God bless you. Until next time.